Welcome everybody to the Jewish Federation of Ottawa's election roundtable. Today we are meeting with candidates for the Liberal Party. Today we have Yasser Naqvi in Ottawa Centre, Anita Vandenbeld, whose constituent I am, in Ottawa West Nepean, and Chandra Arya in Nepean. I will note that Chandra will only be with us for a brief time, and therefore we know that he will be leaving us shortly. So welcome to all. The roundtable will last no more than 1 hour, and the format will be as follows. All candidates will have 2 minutes for opening remarks. My apologies, but this time limit will be vigorously enforced. With appreciation to members of the Federation's Communication and Community Relations Committee and our board chair, Ian Sherman. They have prepared questions on issues of concern to the community, and both candidates will have all candidates will have an opportunity to answer. If you have a question for our candidates, please submit them using the chat function to the moderator, and Federation CEO Andrea Friedman will moderate a Q&A. After the Q&A, each candidate will get a brief opportunity for closing remarks. Bearing in mind that Chandra has told us that someone is waiting in the car with the engine running for him, I'll turn the first remarks over to him.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Andrea, for hosting this. I like to thank the Jewish Federation of Ottawa for hosting this roundtable, which I feel is very important. I am proud that my riding of Nepean includes key part of Ottawa's vibrant Jewish communities with 2 synagogues. My private members' bill in the last parliament, the first parliament of mine, I should say, was strengthening the criminal code subsection dealing with hate crimes against the places of worships, including churches, synagogues, temples, and other places. The Jewish community and the Jewish organizations in Nepean and across Canada lent their very solid support, and with their support, my private member's bill was passed unanimously in Parliament. Now it is a part of the criminal law. But we have more work to do. We have seen significant rise in racism and hate crimes in our community and across Canada, including anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Asian racism. To combat this, we need to strengthen the laws dealing with hate crimes, and at the same time, we need to invest in educating Canadians, especially younger Canadians. And both are equally important. We have expanded the secular infrastructure program. When the synagogue in Barhaven was vandalized with racist graffiti, I worked with Rabbi there and got over $80,000 in federal funding to strengthen the security. Have visited Israel twice before I entered politics, and I'm a member of Canada-Israel Parliamentary Group. I am very active on the Middle East file, and I work with my colleagues to have a very lasting peaceful solution where Israelis and Palestinians can live together next to each other in peace. In addition to the synagogues here, I have worked with several Jewish organizations such as Israel Connect to get them funding from the federal government. And once again, thank you so much for inviting me and for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandra. And who wants to go next? Well, Anita, you look enthusiastic, so why don't you go ahead?
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for having us. I know I see some very familiar faces, and it's wonderful to be able to join you again. I know as an MP, I've met with you several times, but also to congratulate the Jewish community here in Ottawa for everything that you do in the community to contribute to social justice, to contribute to anti-poverty. This is a community that I know I've participated many times. Bringing the Prime Minister to the kosher food bank at one point, and we had the Tamir Choir singing for us. The work that you do with disabilities, there's so many things that I'd like to applaud. One of the things I think is really important is the partnership. You know that I was the one that sponsored a petition in the House of Commons. It was sponsored with the Center for Holocaust Education and Scholarship, and certain community leaders, children of Holocaust survivors like Arthur Leader, because one of the things that shocked me when in my conversations with the community is that only 22% of millennials say that they understand and know about the Holocaust. My parents, my mother's family, were actually a safe house in the Netherlands for Jews during World War II. I grew up with these stories, but I fear that the next generation doesn't understand. And the problem with that is if we don't remember, if we don't understand, then it's something that will perpetuate. As many of you know, I was the chair for quite some time of the subcommittee on international human rights of the House of Commons. It was when I was chair that in 2018, we were the first parliamentary committee to do a report on the Uyghur genocide. I've been leading in Parliament on calling out the Uyghur genocide, on Magnitsky sanctions. Every year we had an Iran Accountability Week with the subcommittee. As you know, I have been calling out human rights abuses, and then here at home as well. I am proud in the community to see the interfaith leadership that has happened. It's very, very, very troubling to me to see the anti-Semitism, the vandalism, the harassment that's occurring. And I see my role as a member of parliament as building bridges. We have a platform. We have an incredible convening power as members of parliament. And I believe that that's something that I've done. It's something that's more needed now than ever before, particularly with the polarization and online hate. I was very supportive of putting Bill C-36 about online hate before Parliament. The Women's Caucus, when I chaired the Women's Caucus, made online hate a priority. And a lot of this was actually driven by the Women's Caucus. I know that I've worked with many of you with a roundtable that we did with the women in the Jewish community on pay equity. I was the chair of the pay equity committee. So we have a number of things. I know you have questions as well, but the most important thing is that I think to congratulate the community for all of the work that you do and make sure that we're continuing to listen and work alongside you. Thank you.
Yasser.
Great, thank you very much, Michael, and thanks to Andrea and the Jewish Federation of Ottawa for hosting this event. Again, my name is Yasser Naqvi. I'm the Liberal candidate here in Ottawa Centre. Many of you may remember me as your member of provincial parliament in Ottawa Centre as well until 2018. I have to start by mentioning and remembering Rabbi Bolka, this particular event. Many of you would know that all of us are very close to Rabbi, and I always called him my Rabbi. He was absolutely generous and kind to me. I got to work with him on Kindness Week. I get very emotional thinking about and talking about him because he was such a special human being, and what a lasting impact that he has left for our community. So I think of him often because he was always somehow was part of my campaigns in my past endeavors. And I used to always, as much as he was a nonpartisan individual, but he was just a good spiritual guide in that sense. So I think of him quite regularly, and especially right now. I also have had the great distinction of representing, as both Anita and Chandra said, a very vibrant Jewish community here in the city of Ottawa. The entire Jewish campus is located in the riding of Ottawa Centre. We're just very close to the border with Anita's riding, with the Jewish Community Center, with the school Hillel Lodge, which I will be visiting on Sunday to meet some of our seniors about this election. And I've had the great opportunity to then, as a result, work on some really important issues with the Jewish community on issues in the provincial level that were really, really important, especially with Tamir in terms of the need for housing. And that work is still ongoing, unfortunately, but look forward to continue to work on that. Just very quickly, if I could also highlight my experience working with the community across the province when I was the Attorney General of the province. Both Anita and Chandra.
About 10 seconds now.
10 seconds, absolutely, around hate stuff. There's a lot more work needs to be done around being able to lay hate crime charges. I, as the Attorney General, laid charges dealing with anti-Semitism, which we got convictions on. And at a policy level, from a criminal code perspective, I look forward to working on some of the challenges that I know from provincial level are important, and sharing with you as we move forward in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasser. Okay, so going to take chair's privilege here. I'm going to ask the first question. Let's start with anti-Semitism. It is very much on the minds of members of our community. There's been a dangerous rise in anti-Jewish hate. Every year, Jewish Federation of Ottawa, our synagogues, our other community institutions invest significant resources in security. While we're grateful for the federal security infrastructure program, it doesn't cover all of our security needs. Will you support a federal rebate to cover some of the costs of the unfortunately necessary security guards for places of worship and other sites targeted for hate? Who wants to take this first? Okay, there we go again.
Go ahead, Anita.
Well, first of all, before I mean, the answer is unequivocally yes. Before I start answering this question, though, I think that it is deplorable that places of worship have to hire security guards. And I remember, when I was going to some Jewish worship services where some of the younger people were saying, they would turn their backs on the door and then keep looking over their shoulder. And this is unacceptable. As many of you know, I've worked in parts of the world where hatred has led to conflict, war, genocide. I've worked in the Balkans. I've worked with many organizations that the kind of language that is used out there, what is happening online, it's not innocent, because this incites people. And there are people out there, either people who are motivated by hate, but also people with mental health issues who hear this kind of language that is used, and they unfortunately will act on it. And that, to me, is the thing that we need to end. Obviously, we need to provide support for institutions. I don't think that that faith groups should have to pay for the kind of security. I know that the infrastructure program has provided things like cameras and other supports that way. But the more important thing is that we stop this from happening in the first place. It is wrong that anyone in our society should feel afraid because they're going to pray. And I will work with the community on any initiatives. I think this has to be community driven. This has to be led by the community, that will help us to make sure that, first of all, unfortunately, there is a need for it, and we do need to protect the community, but also to see what we do to make sure that this doesn't happen. We can deter it.
Thank you, Anita. Yasser, anything to add?
I agree with everything Anita has said, and given that I am new to the federal scene, of course, I've got some learning to do in terms of what tools are available, what programs are available to be able to help community in terms of enhancing security. I would like to learn more about the rebate that you're speaking of, and I'm sure CJ will have some important information on that, and look forward to working with you on that.
Okay, thank you. Our next question will come from our chair of the Jewish Federation of Ottawa, Ian Sherman. Ian?
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Anita and Yasser, for joining us this afternoon. It's good to see you. Given its seriousness and prevalence, let's stick with the topic of anti-Semitism. Educating about the Holocaust, and Anita, you touched on this, is extremely important to prevent all future genocides. While some schools and districts do a good job on Holocaust education, unfortunately, many do not. And this is too important to leave to chance. Will you support the creation of a standardized national social studies curriculum that focuses on anti-Semitism and the Holocaust and is also informed by expert research?
I can start first. Yeah, Ian, and thank you for asking that question. Of course, I bring a little bit of my provincial experience in that regards as well, because we know curriculum development is at the provincial level. But one of the things that I have always articulated, and I think that goes core to what the Jewish community has been talking about when it comes to Holocaust, that if we know our history, we will learn not to repeat it. And so Holocaust education, in my view, is extremely important so that we can avoid any other future incidents like that as well. And so when it comes to hatred and is spread right now, we're seeing it, unfortunately, always tends to start with anti-Semitism, but then it also goes to other groups as well. And we're seeing that around the Muslim faith as well. So having any kind of effort to ensure that we've got standardized education around Holocaust, to people understand what genocides mean and how a genocide like Holocaust can really attempt to destroy an entire community, and the aspects of that continues to go on, is really important. I'm starting to see some signs of some boards now taking these issues in their own hand and starting to develop strategies. I think it probably would be better off if the provincial government, of course, through the Ministry of Education, could do so to create a more standardized curriculum. If there are opportunities at the national level, at the federal level, to create that standard as well, and Anita probably will know more through the work of the subcommittee on Human Rights Committee, I will be an absolute champion of that. Just going back to my first point, because education is key, and if we educate ourselves around events like Holocaust, we know that we can prevent a lot of this hate and types of genocides in different parts of the world as well.
Okay, thank you. Our next question will come, actually, our next two questions.
Can I answer that question too?
Oh, my apologies, yes.
Okay, and actually, I really do want to answer this question because it's something I have been working on for quite some time. Obviously, as Yasser mentioned, the education curriculums are set by the provinces. But one of the things the federal government can do, and particularly through Heritage Canada, is content. We can actually do the research. We can make sure that we're funding community groups to gather the testimonies of Holocaust survivors, because right now it is urgent that those who still have that lived experience, the stories, that we capture that knowledge. We can provide programming, not just for schools. One of the conversations I've had with some of the young people in the riding are that in school, yes, you can get these kinds of curriculum, but what about the young people who aren't going to university? They go into the workforce, and where you see a lot of this are how do you reach those young people? So I've been working, as I said, with the Center for Holocaust Education and Scholarship, which is affiliated with Carleton University and U of O. And I've been working with them. First of all, we did a petition. And the first step on Holocaust education in schools is to actually map it out. Where are the gaps? How much, we don't even know right now nationally how many programs there are in school curriculums. So we need to map it out. And then the federal government can help to create some of the national content that can be provided to the schools through Heritage Canada, but also I've been working on, and we're not quite there yet, but I want to be reelected so I can keep pushing for this, an online space where we can gather the testimonials of Holocaust survivors and the intergenerational impact. So the children and grandchildren of survivors, but then also have young people. And this could include racialized young people, talk about their experiences with racism, discrimination, and fear. And they can put their stories so that young people can relate to what the Holocaust really was, how these kinds of hatreds start, and have that kind of online space. So anyway, we could go on, but this is something that I've been working very, very hard, and I plan to continue. We have not, the government response to the petition, we haven't gone as far as I would like to go. So one of the reasons I want to be reelected is so that I can keep pushing on that.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Jonathan Friedman. Actually, our next two questions.
Let's switch focus to international relations in the Jewish state of Israel. Israel is the only country in the world routinely criticized when she takes the same steps as any other country would to defend herself against terrorist attacks, as we saw most recently this May. Will you urge the government to support Israel unequivocally when Israelis must defend themselves from terrorism?
I can go first. So let me just first of all start by saying that I had the great fortune of visiting Israel with the invitation of CIJA in November of 2019. Those days when we could travel is still, and has become one of the most defining moments in my life, in terms of being able to visit Jerusalem and be able to we traveled pretty much the entire country, including Ramallah on Palestinian Authority. We had, and I saw Ali Grant is on this call. She was one of the people who organized it, so I want to thank her. Had one of the most remarkable educator with us, who really walked us through, of course, the faith, the history of the land, the culture, the politics. And so I got a much deeper appreciation as an individual, as a person, somebody who takes interest in international relations, around the role Israel plays in terms of promoting human rights, the role Israel plays in terms of promoting democracy, being a very rich democratic state. I mean, how many countries in the world go through 4 elections within 3 years? And do it successfully without any violence? I think that's something to be commended on. And the challenges around the peace process. All this to say that everyone should have the right to live peacefully without any terrorism being targeted, without targeting any civilians. I will say this, I'm a pacifist. I do not believe in violence from anyone. And so if terrorist attacks are being made against people of Israel, that has to be condemned. And I will do so at every opportunity to do so. My hope and my work coming at the federal level is that we can build lasting peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. They have lived on this land together for a very long time. They deserve to live together peacefully. And if Canada and Canadian parliamentarians can play a role in that, given that we have such a rich history of living together with each other and learning from each other, I want to be part of that. And I will seek your guidance in that work as well. Thank you.
Thanks. So I've actually, well, first of all, we know that the Liberal Party supports a 2-state solution. The 2 times that I've been to Israel was very interesting, and I've talked about this often, because both times I stayed at the same hotel. I was at the American Colony Hotel. The first time was through the predecessor for CIJA. It was when I was working internationally, and a parliamentary staff trip went to Israel, and I actually joined the tail end of it. I saw David Cooper here, who was on that. And I experienced what it was to go to the beach in Tel Aviv and then stop into McDonald's for lunch and have to, have your backpack searched and be fearful. And I saw the the fact that, you know, it is hard in an environment where Israel is to try to maintain a democratic state. I remember after 9/11 how they did surveys of Canadians, how quick Canadians were to give up our freedom and our democracy for security. And I think that that is something that that really struck me on that visit. The next time I went to Israel was actually through the UNDP program for assistance to the Palestinian people. And I spent most of my time in Ramallah and the West Bank. We couldn't go to Gaza, but it was through a program that I led globally on bringing women together. And this is an area that I believe Canada needs to do a lot more. We are very well positioned on creating the people to people ties. I led a discussion, and this was promoting discussions through online, through technology, of women leaders. And I led a discussion of women in Gaza and women in Israel. And the thing that surprised me most when it was virtual. It was a table where we had the TV screen at the end of the table, and so it was a virtual table. We couldn't meet physically, and it was really shocking to me, not that all of the women were saying the same thing. They want their children to grow up in peace, to have opportunities, to not have to face violence. It was that the Israeli women were surprised to hear the mothers in Gaza say it, and the women in Gaza were surprised that Israeli women were saying it. And that gap, there is a tremendous gap. That program was about $300,000 for me to continue that dialogue. And I couldn't get a single country, including Canada, to fund that program when I was doing the resource mobilization for UNDP. This is the kind of thing that I would like to see a lot more of. I think that, and I've talked to other colleagues in the Liberal caucus, including Yara Sachs, who have done a lot of work on the people to people ties. And that's something that I would like to focus because, you know, as you said, you know, Canada needs to be in a position to really promote peace, and also human rights. And I'll note that, you know, yes, I have been critical at times of what is, you know, the settlements and other policies, but, you know, I've been much more critical as the chair of the Human Rights Subcommittee and done a number of hearings on Iran, on other areas that are, you know, you just can't compare. And so I think that that's the area that I would put my focus, is particularly women. I don't believe in an essentialist view of women, but we do know in conflict zones and in areas where there isn't peace, it is women and children who face the brunt of it. And if you bring them in and make them part of the solution and empower civil society to be able to get involved in the democratic processes, that's when you can actually have real partners for peace.
Jonathan, your next question.
Israeli citizens have always yearned for the desire to live in peace in our ancestral homeland. Public opinion poll after public opinion poll proves this, that the vast majority of Israelis yearn for this. Many Palestinians also crave the ability to live in peace. However, this hope is seriously impeded by policies of the Palestinian Authority encouraging terrorism. The Palestinian Authority's Martyr Fund incentivizes and rewards violence by paying imprisoned or injured Palestinians or families of those killed as a result of committing acts of violence against Israelis. Recipients of funds also include mass murderers and families of suicide bombers. This perverse program works on a sliding scale. The bloodier the carnage, the greater the reward. The Palestinian payments from the Pay to Slay program are higher than Palestinian minimum wages. Will you call on the PA to stop rewarding terrorism and cease their Pay to Slay program?
Yes, I mean, it is deplorable anytime anyone is incentivizing violence, incentivizing terrorism. But I think we need to go even beyond that. When I was in Ramallah, some of the young people told me if they want to join a soccer club, if they want to have computer classes, it's all run by Hamas. So these young people are brought into that sphere just by wanting to do the control of the day-to-day lives. Well, in Gaza especially, the control that they have. I think what we need to do is exactly what I was talking about in my previous answer, is make sure that we can build up the civil society, build up the democracy, build up, as long as there is a hold that Hamas and others have over day-to-day society, and this is where poverty comes in. This is where opportunity comes in. As long as the young people don't have opportunities, unless they are complicit and part of that, we're not going to have peace. And so this is where a lot of the work that I've done with democracy building within Palestine and around the world, but particularly the democracy building and promotion, I think is something that we really need to do more of as a country.
Yeah,
I wanted to agree with Anita, and I have to say I did not know about such a fund exists until I read the briefing document that was created by CIJA, and I have to tell you, I felt fear as I was reading it, and I will go back to what I said earlier. I will never condone any acts of violence towards people, and if this is a tool being used to incur to cause violence, I will condemn that, and I will work with my colleagues, all parliamentarians, no matter which side of the aisles come, that we work towards putting an end to it. Jonathan, you're absolutely right. When I was in Israel and spoke to many Israelis, some Palestinians, and nobody said that they don't want peace. Nobody said that they want to live peacefully. Nobody said they don't want their children to go to school in a peaceful manner. Everybody wants the life that you and I live, and our respective communities live here in Canada. And this is where it gets so frustrating. Going, why cannot we have peace? These people have lived on this land for a long, long time, and they have been neighbors before, and they can be peaceful neighbors again. And I think, to Anita's point, I'm a firm believer in democracy. As we were talking about, Israel is a strong democracy. What's needed also within Palestine is a strong democracy that is functions, because that's how people will be looked after. That's why their basic needs will be met, and you would not have to rely. That's how you can undermine corruption, of course, and you don't need this kind of tools to mobilize people, which is just to cause hurt, pain, suffering, death, which is unacceptable.
Okay, thank you. The next two questions will come from Ali.
Thanks, Michael. And Anita and Yasser, thanks so much for joining us. And I also just want to thank you for all the engagement you've had with the community over the years when I was working with the community, and it's great to see it now that I'm volunteering. So I do have two questions, switching gears a little bit. The first one is on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRIP. As you know, this was adopted in Canada earlier this year. And if elected or re-elected, how will you work to prioritize and quickly implement UNDRIP to support Indigenous people living in Canada?
So I guess I'll start. Yes, I was very proud to vote twice for UNDRIP. Unfortunately, it was delayed by the opposition in the previous parliament, and we were able to get it through as a priority in this parliament. And if you look in the government areas, things that are the responsibility of government, we are either already implemented or well on our way to implement 80% of the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. Individually, I was, when I was chair of Women's Caucus, I sponsored with Indigenous elders and Kairos, the first ever Indigenous blanket ceremony on Parliament Hill with members of Parliament. And I had done a blanket ceremony before being elected, and I felt it very personally as an individual. But doing the blanket ceremony in my role as a representative of the institution that has committed so many of these abuses against Indigenous peoples over the decades, there was a tremendous feeling of responsibility that I had. And for me, this is very personal. You'll see the statistics, and we can talk about what we've done in terms of ending boil water advisories, refurbishing or building 200 schools, the thousands of infrastructure and other programs, the mental health supports, there's a tremendous amount that we've done in terms of the day-to-day lives. One that I'm most proud of is actually C92. This is the first time ever that there's federal legislation on Indigenous child protection. And it came initially at Largabaffin. I don't know if you know Largabaffin here in my riding, which is where Inuit, people from Nunavut, come and stay, because the Ottawa Hospital is the primary hospital for people from Nunavut. And I heard the story of a 17-year-old young woman who was in foster care in Nunavut, came here and gave birth. And the child was apprehended at birth because under Ontario law, children who are themselves in foster care or in the system, they get their children apprehended. But that how many of those Inuit children have been left here in Ottawa to grow up 1,000 miles away from their culture, their family, their language. And so I worked with the minister at that time, this was back in 2016, even though it wasn't in the mandate letter, to push for federal legislation, because it wasn't because it didn't fall under federal government. It's because the federal government had never legislated on Indigenous children's protection. We passed Bill C-92 as chair of Women's Caucus. We pushed very hard to get that done, and it came into force last month. So now, if there are Indigenous children, they will fall under federal law, which requires that these children stay within Indigenous communities. And that, to me, is going to make the biggest difference, because we see that there are more Indigenous children in care today than at the height of the residential schools. So this is the first time that we actually have federal legislation that is going to reverse that. So, so there's a number of things that I've been working on, this is, as the Prime Minister said, the most important relationship. And just to put it in context, budget 2021 alone had more than 3 times what the Kelowna Accord was. And we've done that every single year since we were elected. So it's not all about money, it's about relationships, it's about the ongoing discussions on self governance and self-realization. But we're committed to it, and there's so much more to do, so much more. But we're committed to it.
Thanks, Anita. I don't mean, I'm not directing this at Yasser, but we've got about 20 minutes left. So if we can try to shorten answers so that we can get to all of our questions and to some of the questions that are online, that would be great. Yasser, do you have something to add to this?
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. And thank you from a lawyer to lawyer for reminding me to keep my answers short. So I appreciate that. I just want to say that has been a meaningful reconciliation with Indigenous people has been the starting point of me wanting to come back into public service. I just spent 2.5 years as the CEO of the Institute for Canadian Citizenship, which is a national not-for-profit foundation created by Adrian Clarkson, our former Governor General, and John Rostensaul. And one of the biggest work that I was championing there was, how do we get new Canadian citizens involved in the process of reconciliation, to make the argument that one of the responsibilities of a citizen, small c citizen, in Canada is to engage in reconciliation, which starts by knowing the truth, by knowing the injustices that were suffered by Indigenous people, the colonization, the genocide that they suffered, and then determining those acts of reconciliation. And one of the things that I'm talking to my constituents as I'm knocking on their doors is that, what can we do at the local level as community associations, as members of various organizations, to engage in the act of reconciliation? Land acknowledgements are extremely important to remind ourselves which land we're standing on, but we have to now go beyond just acknowledging that we are on unsurrendered and unceded territory of the Algonquin and the Anishinaabe peoples here in Ottawa. And so I'm hoping that if I'm elected as the Member of Parliament for Ottawa Centre, that I will be able to work on these issues, both from a perspective of policy, but also programs and engaging and learning from Indigenous people to do so.
Thank you, Yasser. Ali, your next question, please.
Thank you. So during times of chronic shortages in Canada's blood supply, LGBTQ plus Canadians want to help save lives, but unfortunately Canadian Blood Services prohibits many of these individuals from donating blood unless they have been celibate for at least 3 months. Will you support an end to the blood ban on LGBTQ2 plus donations and instead use scientific screening methods to keep our blood supply safe?
Simple answer is yes.
Yeah, me too. Yes. And by the way, I just to add, and I know we want to keep short answers, the fact that the Kehilat Beth Israel holds a Pride Shabbat every year, it is the only faith group that I know of that actually has a Pride dinner. And I just want to congratulate you on that. I think that's vitally important.
So with all due respect to, I'm a member of KBI, but our friends over at Temple Israel observe Pride Week as well.
So I'm part of one of my riding.
Down the street from my home in my riding of Ottawa Centre.
There we go. Ian Sadinsky with the next question.
Well, here's one that both candidates can take credit for, because I know you both mentioned in your opening remarks the wonderful work done by our Tamir Foundation, which is a beneficiary agency of the Jewish Federation of Ottawa. My question concerns housing, which is a greater issue for the public, but this is a particular question about housing. The National Housing Strategy, or NHS, includes important commitments to fund up to 2,400 new housing units for people living with developmental disabilities. Will you continue the National Housing Strategy and increase capital and operating funding investments for affordable ethnocultural housing initiatives?
Yes. And so I'm so glad you mentioned Tamir House. So first of all, absolutely yes. And I think that certainly supportive housing for persons with disabilities is a absolute priority. I've had a number of conversations with my provincial counterpart, Jeremy Roberts, about Tamir House. And even though it's just outside my riding, it's in Yasser's, but I'm very disappointed because Bob Shirelli, when he was infrastructure minister, actually got the funding and signed the funding for Tamir House. And then when Doug Ford became the premier, all of the things that were done in that last little bit of the Liberal government were put in a hold. Now, what Jeremy Roberts has said to me most recently is, we should be fortunate that it's still on a hold, because a whole bunch of those projects were actually then canceled, and this one hasn't been canceled yet. So I don't know, I don't take a lot of comfort in that, but I will continue pushing, because this is one of the things that I've criticized of our own government, of what we did with our infrastructure funding, is we gave it to the province and let the province decide the projects. And since then, I've had a lot of conversations with Catherine McKenna that we need to have methods of being able to provide funding directly to community groups, especially when there's self-funding, that the federal government can then partner and not necessarily go through the province to do that. And we've done that with a number of the COVID-related infrastructure projects. This one, unfortunately, is still tied up with that original transfer of the money that we sent to the province, which they haven't spent. So I will fight and keep fighting, because frankly, this is exactly the kind of project that is desperately needed for Ottawa.
And Anita, I will be there with you. I was at that announcement. I spoke along with Bob Shirelli when we made the announcement, and I have to be honest with you, I've had subsequent meetings with the community, even though both Bob and I are not elected, about I felt like that I was being looked as a liar, that somehow we just issued a press release. And I can tell you, I sat on Treasury Board of Ontario, and there was a Treasury Board note, and I wish I would have kept a copy of it, but these are confidential documents and you're not allowed to. And so Anita is absolutely right in her assessment that she's presented to you. The funding was provided. I'm glad to hear that it's on hold, that it was not canceled. In this campaign, I have committed to seek funding for at least 1,700 not-for-profit social housing units in my riding of Ottawa Centre. And the Tamir House is located in the riding of Ottawa Centre, and that's one of the projects is in my line of sight that I would like to work with the community to get funding for, so that we can build that home. We know how much that community, people with intellectual disabilities, need that kind of wraparound services, and there's no better organization in our great city of Ottawa than Tamir to provide that culturally faith-based, sensitive services. And we have the land. You've done the hard work. It's now we just got to get the money so it can be built.
Okay, thank you both. Thank you, Ian. We're now going to move to a moderated question and answer. Andrea will moderate. For anybody with questions, I see we have 3 of them. Please send them in. I'm going to ask again that we try to keep this to short, crisp answers, because we also want to give you a few seconds for a wrap up at the end. Andrea?
So thank you, Michael and Anita and Yasser. It's nice to see both of you again. The first question that I will ask from the audience is about Jenica Atwin, and specifically why the Liberal Party welcomed Jenica Atwin from the Green Party. And to make it a little more complicated for you to answer, what's your personal position on that?
Having been in caucus when that happened, she had very clearly, when she joined the Liberal caucus, made statements to clarify the things that she had said earlier. And that's, I'm not going to get into any views in terms of, I think, when people cross the floor, there are a number of things, a number of issues at play. But she did issue a statement that was much better than some of the things she said before.
I don't know Miss Admin. I look forward to working with her if she's elected and I'm elected. I have shared with you my views, and I will remain steadfast on my views, and I will engage in respectful conversations with everyone and anyone from, again, among all parliamentarians and in the community, if we hear views that stigmatizes or targets one group of people, one faith, as we unfortunately see often in those type of incidences. That is not my values. As I said, I want to work. I'm coming to the federal level, and I want to work towards peace. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think Canada can play such an important role because we demonstrate, we live it every day in our community, despite some of the challenges around hate and anti-Semitism. So I want to be in a place to work with the community to leverage all that and hopefully have peace in our times.
Thank you. So the next question is a bit more of a provincial and municipal responsibility, but I think understanding your viewpoints on it is always interesting for voters. And it pertains to police services. Financially, there's a call for defunding or budget freezes. The courts are not supporting their efforts to keep repeat offenders behind bars, and the role of police officers are becoming skewed. The questioner believes that to justify that this is a result of a reduction of officers, that Ottawa Police Services are already far below the number of officers that we should have based on our population. So the question is, what would you and the Liberal government do to support officers, enforce prison terms, and reduce eligibility for bail for repeat offenders?
So I can start with this because this was my beat. I was both the Solicitor General for Ontario and the Attorney General, so I've got a fair bit of experience working on these issues. These are very important questions, and no surprise that the answers are complex as well. So given the time we've got, I may not be able to hit all the aspects, but this is what I will tell you. We did a very significant review in Ontario when I was elected at that level of the Police Services Act, and what we did is we actually for the very first time legislated the whole notion of prevention. Because that is all as we all know, whether it's our personal health or our community safety, prevention is the best way of dealing with things. And what we have required is that all communities engage through municipality in developing a community safety and well-being plans. And then police and community members work together in ensuring that our community is safe. Related to that also is ensuring that the right kind of professionals are providing the right kind of services. We have actually, I'll be very frank with you, we have put our police services in a very difficult situation. They are trained to keep us safe. They are not trained, nor should it be their job, to deal with people with mental health and addiction issues. And that's what we find our police doing most of the time. And the reason they're doing it is because we have not supported those social services around mental health and addiction at a community level well. So it just falls upon our police services. And if you talk to any police chief across the country, they will tell you they don't want to do that job because that's not their job. Their job is to make sure that our neighborhood's safe, and if murder is being committed, that they do the investigation and they bring people to justice. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, being done at the provincial level, but I think there's a lot of scope at the federal level that I want to pursue, given my experience around proper resourcing and partnerships between community groups providing those type of services and the police working together. My last point is around bail. And again, I did a lot of work in that, is that the default cannot be, and there's jurisprudence on this, Supreme Court of Canada has opined on this, that our default cannot be to just lock people up. There's a lot of people who will be far better off if they are in a community setting, even in a bail circumstance, especially people, again, with mental health and addiction issues, versus being at Ottawa Carleton Detention Center. Of course, if somebody's a dangerous offender and have done really bad things, then a justice of peace or a judge will determine that they are flight risk and they should be in remand. But if you're somebody who did break or enter because you have an addiction and you were trying to support that addiction, then you're far better off. What I did, for example, as the Attorney General, where we used justice dollars to put into supports, creating homes where you can still be in a protective situation, but also getting supports for addiction. So I think these are the kind of ways that we need to look at it. These are not unique ideas, by the way. There's other countries who are much wiser than us, who are putting the appropriate resources and doing it. And it's time that Canada do this, not as just pilot projects, but as a way of dealing with it. There are room and opportunities in criminal court to make those changes. And I've got a laundry list of things that I would like to get changed. And if I'm elected, I will be working on it. Thank you.
So I don't have a lot to add to Yasser. I'll just say that one of the things that we just did was to introduce legislation on ending mandatory minimums. That's something I feel passionately about and I'm going to continue pushing for.
So
Okay.
thank you both very much. I think, Michael, in the interest of time, we should probably move on with the agenda.
Okay. Thanks to our formal and informal questioners. Over to each of you for brief closing remarks.
I just want to thank you again for having us, for creating this space where we can have these kinds of discussions. As many of you know, my background, my professional background is in human rights. It's in international human rights. I think that the focus of the questions you've asked today about human rights, about social justice, about ending racism, discrimination, anti-Semitism, these are very much what drives me. What are the reasons that I am in politics? And as I said before, I do believe that what leaders say matters. We do have a forum to be bridge builders, but I also think that leadership, what we say will have an impact. When you have a leader who says, this is your neighbor, be afraid, your neighbor wants to hurt you, people will react to that. People do react to fear. When you have a leader who says, this is your neighbor, they need your help, I think we are all, as human beings, we are socialized. It's an instinct in us to want to help. And I think that part of leadership, whether it's as a member of parliament or leadership at the national and international level, is making sure that we are the ones that are saying, this is your neighbor, they need your help, and appealing to the better nature in people. Because we do see, and we have seen, when you do have leaders that are stoking fear, we've all seen the consequences of that. So that is something I will commit to, and I applaud all of you for the work that you're doing in that regard. And I will just commit that I will be there listening. I will be alongside you, as we have been. The Liberal Party, the Liberal government has been alongside you, finding those solutions, but also using the kinds of the position that we have to try to make sure that we are not polarizing, that we are building bridges and bringing people together. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Yasser?
Thank you very much, and once again, thank you again for convening this forum. I will be honest with you, I miss seeing you in person. It's been some time. I miss mitzvah days. I miss being on campus. So hopefully we'll get back to that reality again, where we can be friends and neighbors, and perhaps even give each other a hug. I often say this, and I'm raising 2 young children, and kind of try to say this to them in different ways, that rights and protecting rights is not a buffet. We don't get to pick and choose who gets it and what. It's more like a family dinner. We all sit around the table. I come from a culture where you sit on the floor together and you share food, and that's what rights are about, which is that if I stand up for you and your rights, if somebody's committing, trying to take them away from you or assaulting it, then I know you will do the same for me. And that is, I think, for me, is the essence of Canada, where we all have come from different parts of the world, with the exception of the Indigenous peoples of this land. And we have built this great society because we have this social contract with each other, that we will stand for each other. And that's what guides me. And I will continue to do that work. That's what I learned so much when I was the Attorney General, when groups like CIJA and Simon Wiesenthal and Benai Brat on incidents of anti-Semitism. One of the issues was that the process by which complaints were being funneled and to the AG's office, because AG has to sign off on these things, was not a clear one. We centralized it. We made sure that we did training for our crowns, so they can understand the elements of the hate crime legislation. Again, I know some deficiencies as well that I'm hoping that I will be able to work on. Online hate is the biggest issue right now. All these things, we have to work together, because we're not only defending and protecting the vibrant Jewish community, but we're also doing it for the Muslim community. We're also doing it for the Sikh community. We're also doing it for the Blacks in our society and the Indigenous people, because we are all, at many respects, it's a domino effect. It's a cascading effect that goes from one group of people, if you tolerate it, to others. So I just very much look forward to the opportunity again, quite humbly, to work with you, to listen to you, to learn from you. And I hope on September 20th, I can earn your vote. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Yasser and Anita. We know this is a hectic time for you. Hopefully this hour has been allowed you to rest your feet a little bit before you are back out knocking on doors. Anita, I will note that I haven't seen you at my doorstep yet. Yasser, you're welcome to be at my doorstep, but you can't have my vote. All right. Thank you to all of our formal and informal questioners and our audience and those who watch this on the recording that we'll put out. Shana Tova to everyone. And as I said to another group this morning, you're not going to get this one. Gemar Chatima Tova, which means may you be sealed in the book of life in the coming year. And of course, as Yasser, thank you. Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Have a good day, have a good weekend, and good luck out there.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.